The harder you try, the worse everything gets. The more you try to control life, the more life suffocates you. That is something most people spend years trying to understand. Since childhood, we are taught one thing. If you want success, work harder. If you want love, chase harder. If you want happiness, achieve more. If you want strength, never show weakness. The entire world seems built on one belief. If you try hard enough, you can have everything. But eventually, life reveals a strange truth. There are things that become more distant the harder you chase them. The tighter you hold, the faster they disappear. The more you force sleep, the more awake you become. The more you seek happiness, the more empty you feel. The more desperately you want someone to love you, the less attractive you become. And that is where people begin to encounter one of the deepest paradoxes of life. The law of reversed effort. The harder you force something to happen, the more it resists you. Writer and philosopher Aldous Huxley once said, "The harder we try with the conscious will to do something, the less we shall succeed." At first, that sounds absurd. But if you observe life carefully, you realize that almost everything truly meaningful works this way. Love, confidence, creativity, sleep, peak performance, inner peace. None of them appear through force. They appear when force disappears. Modern people are addicted to control. Modern life has trapped people in a permanent state of tension. Everyone is trying to control everything. Control the future. Control emotions. Control how others perceive them. Control outcomes. Control life itself. But the problem is, life does not obey absolute control. You cannot force someone to love you. You cannot force yourself to sleep. You cannot force creativity to appear. You cannot force peace into your mind. The harder you push, the more resistance you create. And resistance creates suffering. Most people are not exhausted because life is hard. They are exhausted because they are trying to control life. That is why many people have everything externally. Money, status, recognition, but internally feel completely empty. Because they're always trapped in one feeling. Not enough. Not successful enough. Not rich enough. Not attractive enough. Not important enough. And the more they try to fill that emptiness, the emptier they become. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue." That is one of the greatest paradoxes of existence. The most beautiful things often arrive only after you stop desperately needing them. The insomniac is not awake because he cannot sleep. He is awake because he is trying too hard to sleep. Imagine a man lying in bed at 2 a.m. He checks the clock. Then panic begins. I have to sleep. If I don't sleep, tomorrow will be ruined. I need to fall asleep right now. And in that exact moment, he becomes more awake than ever. The harder he tries to sleep, the more active his mind becomes. The more he forces relaxation, the more tense his body feels. Until finally he gives up. Whatever. And minutes later, he falls asleep. Why? Because sleep is the ultimate form of surrender. You cannot use pressure to create relaxation. That is like trying to calm a lake by punching the water. The more you interfere, the more waves you create. The human mind works the same way. The more desperately you seek peace, the more anxious you become. Love works in a strange way. Almost everyone has experienced this. When you desperately need someone, you become anxious. You overthink every message. You constantly seek reassurance. You fear losing them. You try too hard to impress them. You cling to them. And strangely enough, that very behavior pushes them away. Desperation creates invisible pressure. People can feel it. The more validation you need, the less attractive you become. The more afraid you are of losing someone, the more unnatural your behavior becomes. And eventually, the other person feels trapped. That is why emotionally free people often appear more attractive. Not because they are perfect, but because they are not trying to force love. They are relaxed. They do not beg for attention. They do not abandon themselves just to be loved. Charles Bukowski once said, "The people who escape hell However, never talk about it, and nothing much bothers them after that. Real love cannot be forced. It only appears when two people stop trying to possess each other. The more you fear failure, the more likely failure becomes. This happens to countless people. They become obsessed with avoiding mistakes. And that obsession creates the mistake. A speaker becomes terrified of saying the wrong thing. His heart races. His hands shake. His mind goes blank. And eventually, he says the wrong thing. A football player becomes terrified of missing the penalty. And because of the pressure, he misses. A person becomes terrified of rejection. And their anxiety destroys their natural confidence. The very thing they fear becomes reality. Viktor Frankl called this anticipatory anxiety. People unconsciously create failure by obsessing over avoiding failure. That is why the greatest athletes in the world often appear calm. They are not constantly thinking, "Don't mess up." They simply act. Naturally. Effortlessly. Michael Jordan once said, "You have to expect things of yourself before you can do them." But the interesting thing is this. Truly elite performers are rarely tense. They are focused, but relaxed. They enter what many call the flow state. Flow state, when you disappear into the moment. There are moments when human beings operate at an extraordinary level. A musician plays as if the music flows through him. A martial artist reacts without thought. A basketball player sees the game unfold in slow motion. An artist forgets time entirely. In those moments, people are not trying. They are simply flowing. Lao Tzu described this as Wu Wei. Effortless action. Not laziness, but action in harmony with the natural flow of life. A master pianist does not consciously think about every finger movement. An experienced driver does not analyze every turn. Everything becomes natural. But the strange thing is, the moment you become self-conscious about being in flow, you lose it. Because the thinking mind interrupts. You begin analyzing. You begin controlling. You begin forcing. And the flow disappears. Bruce Lee once said, "Be water, my friend." Water does not force. Yet nothing can stop it. It moves around obstacles. It adapts. It remains soft. And over time, it can carve through stone. That is the power of non-resistance. The ego always wants control. Most human suffering comes from the ego. The ego constantly wants victory, recognition, attention, superiority, validation. And because of this, people live under endless pressure. They cannot relax. Even when resting, their minds are still racing, comparing, worrying, calculating. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most human behavior does not come from logic. It comes from unconscious fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of rejection. Fear of failure. Fear of meaninglessness. And those fears cause people to overcompensate. They try too hard to prove themselves. They try too hard to be loved. They try too hard to become perfect. But perfection is a prison. People obsessed with perfection are never free. The strongest people are usually the calmest. Have you ever noticed this? The truly capable people are usually calm. They do not constantly need to prove themselves. A strong fighter does not start unnecessary battles. A truly wealthy person rarely needs to show off. A wise person does not need to win every argument. Calmness is often a sign of real power. Because weak people constantly need to perform strength. Strong people do not. Lao Tzu once said, "He who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know." Modern society is unbearably loud. Everyone is trying to be seen. Trying to prove value. Trying to appear important. Trying to display happiness. But the harder people try to appear extraordinary, the more disconnected they become from themselves. Truly confident people do not need to announce confidence. Truly happy people do not constantly advertise happiness. Creativity does not appear under pressure. The harder you try to force ideas, the more creativity disappears. That is why people often get their best ideas while showering, walking, driving, sitting quietly. Because in those moments, the mind relaxes. Creativity does not thrive under pressure. It appears in space. Charles Bukowski was once asked, "How do you write?" He answered, "Don't try." Those two words became legendary. Don't try. Not because you should do nothing, but because life becomes ugly when everything turns into desperate struggle. The most beautiful things often emerge when the mind is quiet enough to receive them. Society is exhausting humanity. Social media constantly tells people they are behind. Someone is richer. Someone is more attractive. Someone is more successful. Someone is happier. And so people begin running. Running endlessly. Working harder. Trying harder. Comparing harder. But they fail to realize they are running from fear, not toward meaning. That is why many people achieve everything they once wanted and still feel empty, because they were never truly living. They were only trying to become acceptable in the eyes of society. Jim Carrey once said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer." Money can solve many problems, but it cannot heal inner emptiness. If your mind lives in scarcity, nothing will ever feel enough. Letting go is not giving up. Many people misunderstand surrender. They think letting go means being lazy, doing nothing, giving up. But that is not true. Letting go does not mean stopping action. It means acting without desperation. You still work. You still improve. You still grow. But you stop forcing life to obey your demands. You stop attaching your entire identity to outcomes. You stop allowing failure to destroy your spirit. A skilled archer pulls the bow with full strength. But after releasing the arrow, he lets go. If he keeps holding the arrow, it will never fly. Life works the same way. There is a time to act, and there is a time to release. The paradox of happiness. The happiest people are usually not obsessed with finding happiness. They are simply present. They experience life deeply. They do not constantly ask, "Am I happy yet?" Because that question itself creates lack. Alan Watts once said, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." The human mind works the same way. The more aggressively you try to control emotions, the more chaotic they become. Sometimes the best thing you can do is sit still, breathe, and allow life to move naturally. Truly successful people are rarely desperate. There is something strange about highly successful people. Most of them do not carry desperate energy. They are disciplined, focused, committed, but not panicked. They do not behave as if life will collapse after one failure. Because they understand. Tension destroys performance. A fighter who is too tense reacts slowly. A singer who is too anxious loses their voice. A business owner driven by desperation makes terrible decisions. Calmness creates clarity, and clarity creates power. The hardest thing in life is relaxation. It sounds simple, but very few people truly know how to relax. They constantly need stimulation. Phones, social media, noise, notifications. Even when alone, they cannot sit quietly with themselves. Because silence allows hidden fears to rise. So they continue running, doing, working, distracting themselves. But eventually, every human being must learn how to sit alone with themselves. Without escape, without performance, without pretending to be someone else. Just existing. And perhaps that is true freedom. Life is not a battle that must be won at any cost. Many people live as if they are at war with existence. They constantly pressure themselves. Never rest. Never appear weak. Never fail. But life is not a machine. Human beings are not robots. Some things only bloom in gentleness. Love, art, peace, joy. You cannot use violence to create them. Lao Tzu once said, "Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. A tree does not grow faster because you pull on it. It grows through time." Human beings are the same. Not everything needs to be forced. Sometimes maturity means trusting the process. When you stop chasing, life begins to change. The strange thing is, when you are no longer desperate for something, you often become more capable of receiving it. When you stop desperately needing validation, people begin respecting you more. When you stop fearing failure, you move more naturally. When you stop trying to impress everyone, you become more attractive. Because the energy of lack disappears. You stop acting from fear and begin acting from wholeness. That is the difference between someone trying to escape feelings of inadequacy and someone who is truly free. Conclusion. Perhaps the greatest paradox of life is this. The most valuable things appear only after we stop trying to force them. Happiness arrives when we stop forcing happiness. Love arrives when we stop begging to be loved. Confidence arrives when we stop trying to prove our worth. Flow appears when we stop overthinking. Peace appears when we stop fighting ourselves. That does not mean giving up. It means acting without desperation, living without force, trying without losing inner calm. Because in the end, life is not something to suffocate with control. Life is like water. The tighter you grasp it, the faster it slips away. But when you open your hand, it stays.